Welcome to I Have Something to Say, where unfiltered opinions meet raw authenticity. If you're tired of the same old canned answers and crave genuine conversations about real issues, then you've landed in the right spot. So buckle up for a roller coaster of diverse perspectives. Yours truly, Samí Haiman-Marrero, and my co-host, Chris Majocha, will dive headfirst into topics that impact our daily lives. From the boardrooms to the streets, get ready to hear real people cut through the BS and deliver the discussions you've been waiting for. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of I Have Something to Say. I'm Samí Haiman-Marrero. Say hi, Chris.
How's it going, everyone?
And today we have as our guest Alexandra Kapelos-Peters. She's the founder and CEO of Cansulta. And I wanted to make sure that we invited her because it's the beginning of the year. As small business owners and even big businesses, right? We're always looking for new talent. We're always looking to scale. We're always looking for people that can lean in and really do some consulting work, right? That seems to be the new trend. We've talked about this a couple of times, but the problem is, drum roll, that a lot of people can talk a good game and then they show up and it's like, what the bleep, right? And so I wanted to invite you, Alex. Thank you for joining us to talk about the art of vetting consultants because you are the queen, of vetting consultants, and you built a business, Cansulta, around this very problem, right? To solve it. And so welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Samí and Chris. It's so exciting to be here. I'm very spoiled. Obviously, we met in the context of you being a guest on our show featuring, successful women entrepreneurs. And I think you are just such a phenomenal guest there that, my goodness, the opportunity to come here. Once I heard your show, I was like, wow, this is awesome. We're talking about the same stuff, real world, business, real world things that matter. No filter, no context, getting down to the real stuff. And so thank you so much for inviting me today and also for proposing this topic because, I think, as you said, it's becoming really important. And I think like small and mid-sized businesses in particular, we suffer, right? Like we don't have the same opportunities as big businesses do. And sometimes it's hard to realize what those are. I think, it's like probably like being a bit of a neglected child. You don't really know what you're missing out on, right?
Yep.
You didn't grow up with all the rich kids. Like, you don't know what it's like to not have those things. It's a little bit the same, I think, in the small business community, right? Like if you haven't been exposed to like big corporate enterprise life, you don't necessarily know sometimes like the good things that are out there that you're missing out on. And so, I'm very, very biased, 1000%. Everything I'm going to say today is probably unresearched and just my own opinion. So a little disclaimer there. But I'm just so excited that you brought this topic up because I do think that, for me, consulting has become like a really bad, dirty word. And so when I started my business, that was something that people said to me, and I was one of them, right? Like you hear consultant and immediately I would like roll my eyes. You're like, oh, here comes someone in a fancy suit, some like, who's going to cost a fortune and like put some stuff on a PowerPoint. And like, I'm just supposed to pay for this and like go along with it, but it's not going to really do anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how most people feel. And I don't think they're wrong. I think that is the problem with consulting. That's got a pretty bad reputation, right? Across the board. Like it's pretty rare to hear people say like, oh, I worked with a consultant and it was so great. And, for me, that's the problem because when it's right, it is great. When you work with someone who really knows what they're doing, it really it's a cliche, but for me, I call it the magic and the joy of consulting. Because when you do work with someone and it's awesome, you're like, oh my God, how did I not know about this before? Why didn't I do this 1,000 years ago? So to me, it's like, that's the kind of love I want to spread to the world is I want to help people find their awesome consultant who will like be the game changer in their, professional or business life. But like you said, there's a lot of hurdles there. And the problem is that like, I don't want to be that mean person, but like, as you said, most people are all talk and no action. And I don't think that they're bad people out there. I don't think there are people out there who are like trying to rip you off and deceive you, although they exist too. Of
Yes,
course.
they're plenty, there's plenty of that out there too. Yes.
You're right. Like, there definitely are like bad actors. But I think that most people, I think most consultants and like most independents, they have good intentions. Like they really do. It's just like they actually do think they can help you. It's just for a lot of people, they don't really know how to help, that they maybe themselves, like they might be their own expert, a subject matter expert, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily know how to guide or advise you in your business.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, I think we've just ended up with a lot of people. And then, we can go onto the whys after, but like the market is filled right now with so-called consultants, right? A lot of people who have been laid off, or a lot of people who are just fed up with their own corporate jobs. And they're like, hey, I want out of this. So instead I'll go freelance and I'll consult. And I think that's amazing. But as you said, it's really hard for us to discern like who's good or not.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's really scary because, it's not to be like taken lightly. We're talking about, what can be a really significant financial investment. You spend a lot of money working on with someone, and, if what they end up producing for you is lost, like, ouch. So yeah. So I just think it's a great topic, and I'm really excited to talk about it because I don't think there is one obvious solution at all. So it's really like, how do you take advantage of working with really great people who can help you while also protecting yourself, right? And not falling victim to them just being smooth talkers, or like having some great online presence, but not really being able to actually help you out.
Yeah, totally. And so talk to us about your work career. Like, how did you land? What took you to launch Cansulta, right? Because I bet it was like one day you were probably like pulling your hair out, and you were, you clearly know about the corporate world. Just give me all the yummy details, all the behind the scenes, under the radar gossip that tells you to say, I'm done. And actually, you're one of, and so she left, right? So you podcast, right? So yeah. So please tell us the what happened and why, right? Did you decide to embark, right, on launching Cansulta 4 years ago and creating this solution?
Yeah, I love that you see that. I think, well, and probably Samí, it's similar for you. Like they say that all kind of founders and entrepreneurs, we're all a little nuts for sure. There's like, you could call it, some people call it the entrepreneurial mindset or the founder's mindset. I call it sometimes a condition or a syndrome. There's definitely like, there's a lot to it that's really amazing. It takes a special kind of person, right? And I mean that in all the ways. You have to be your own champion, but like also sometimes you catch yourself just every day is that roller coaster that never, I don't know when that goes away. Samí, you've been at this a lot longer than I have. Does that roller coaster ever stop?
No, Mama, I'm so sorry. So brace yourself. It's like this. Brace yourself. Like this. Half the time.
I always wonder when that is, where it'll like be that one magic day where you're like, okay, box check. Now we're just like in stable mode.
It's a roller coaster. You see the beautiful view at the top right before the plummet again. So
that's going over the little ledge there. Here we go. Yeah. Bump ahead. So yeah, I mean, I think they say like for most of us, most entrepreneurs, right? Like you set out to kind of solve your own problems or fix your own issues, right? So that was very much the case for me. I have actually like my story is a little strange because I have two stories and they're both true, but they're like on both sides of the spectrum. One was like my own moment as a consultant where I was just kind of like fed up with the current state of affairs. And then on the flip side was me as a small business owner, as well, just being frustrated with like not having solutions. So, I had two kind of like origin stories for why that all came to be. But to your points on me, like, yeah, I also like, I won't bore you with my career history. It's funny, after enough time, I find it actually all becomes one blur. Like now I have to look at my own resume sometimes to remember, like, where did I work at Kaboom and how long was that?
That's an awesome thing, but
Right.
isn't it process? It's like the detox. It's like fully detox. That's awesome.
That's a good point. Maybe you're right. Maybe that means there's finally been like enough distance. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Because, there was a point much earlier in my career when things were much closer. And it's true, there was like a very emotional, response. Even talking about work history, when people be like, tell me about your last job. And some of them I would like cringe and get stressed, So it's nice that all of that is over. I guess my PTSD from working in the corporate world has finally mostly faded. So that's a good sign. But yeah, I guess pretty much like, I've covered my grays today, but as I like to say, I grew my grays that are now hiding in a bunch of different kind of corporate worlds, and big and small. So I get bored a bit easily. So I work for some pretty large government and crown corporations, and I work for some large private agencies. And then, every once in a while I get a little fed up and I'd go to a much smaller shop. So I went to some small businesses that would have, 40, 50 people. And of course, anywhere I went, I enjoyed it, learned a ton, and then would complain. So it's always the question of like, if they would get sick of me first or I'd get sick of them. But someone always won out. And it was usually like the grass is always greener. When it was too big, then I would like complain how slow and bureaucratic,
Right.
And then these like monolithic dinosaur organizations that, just like couldn't change. And why did it take 80 years and 40 people to sign off on something? And then I would go to some of the smaller organizations and be like, oh my God, how come we have to have 50 meetings? And it takes, like we change our minds and our direction every 3 minutes. Can't we stick to one direction, please? So, like this is never really perfect, but all that to say, I was very lucky because of the diversity that I had in that experience. Like in my, let's call it 20 years, give or take, do some rounding. I worked at a lot of companies. I mostly only ever stayed somewhere for 2 to 3 years. So I got to see a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries. And so I feel really lucky in that sense because it really like, there are disadvantages too, jack of all trades, master of none, as they say. But on the flip side, I really got to see a lot of different businesses and how they operated. And so that was kind of, I guess, a little bit of, if I planted the seed, is that like gave me a lot of vision on how things could work, right? Not to say anything is perfect, but just like all of that kind of view. And then to your point, Samí, like basically I won't call it official burnout, but because that's kind of like, I think that's become a popular kind of approach, but in hindsight, call it what you will. I just kind of had my breaking point, about 5 years ago-ish, 6 years ago, something like that. Where it just kind of, for me, it was like, I didn't really see how things were going to change. It was like, oh, okay, I can keep working. I had a good position in a good company with a good team. I can't complain. But I found myself still, working really 16 to 20 hours a day, every day. And it was just like, it was unending, right? Because there's just like always more work. And I worked in an agency. And so the, high expectations with some big clients and, just like it really never felt like anything ever really got done because you just finish one thing, you're on to the next project and go, 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 go. And so I kind of, for me, that's when I, now I'm talking, I guess, more on the consulting side. Yeah. But for me, it was kind of like that moment of like, is this all there is? I was like, oh my God, like I'm just going to work here like a dog day in and day out. And like one day I will actually just have a heart attack and die. And like, that sucks. Like, I don't really want that story, you know?
Yeah.
Like, she just worked really, really hard and then died. Like, that didn't really sound like what I was looking for.
Right.
And just like, we're all kind of trained to climb the corporate ladder. And so that's what I had been doing. It was like, work. And, manager this, director that. When I finally got my VP title, I was so excited. I finally got a nice office, blah, blah, blah. But all of these things, like every time I check them off, like nothing really changed. I still didn't sleep enough. I still spend most of my time at my local Subway because there was no time to like restaurant to like eat, so it wasn't like life was really improving with all of those, steps along the journey.
With all those advancements, right? All of those career advancements.
Exactly, right? All the things we're supposed to be working so hard for, right? We're all supposed to like dog eat dog and like work really hard and make more money and manage more people and do all this stuff. And then every time that was happening for me, I was like, this is just the same or worse.
Exactly.
So I guess, yeah. So for me, that was the transition to the world of consulting was like, and I don't want to like poo-poo anybody's corporate jobs and roles. Like that is great for some people. But for me, it was like, been there, done that. Now what? Like, I don't want to do this forever. So for me, moving into consulting was actually just, it was more about like doing, of course, there's the like, I could, in theory, control my own time and the type of work that I do and who I get to work with. You don't have to, say yes to everything. You can be a lot more intentional about what you do and feel good about it. And so there were all of those kind of great pieces. And, I think like for me, that was what was really enticing about it. I was like, I had all these friends who were consulting and I was like, wait a minute, your life is great. You like make a lot more money. You set your own hours. You seem to like, if I want to go for lunch at, 2:00 in the afternoon with them, they'd be available. I was like, this is the life. I'm getting on it. So that was kind of like how things, the door kind of opened to just being like, wow, this is a whole other way of working and it's a different world. And you can, still add value and do things that you find rewarding and meaningful, but not, but do it like on your own terms.
Yeah.
So that was like, kind of for me on like how I became a consultant and moved and transitioned that part. And on the other side, it's like the totally bit of the different story, is that I actually had another business, with some partners, very different from this one, also in consulting, but we were in the pharmaceutical space. So really quite different. And, we were, oh goodness, how to like tell this story succinctly. So we're a Canadian company with mostly Canadian, workers and team members, but our clientele were mostly in the US and in Europe. And basically, I was responsible for the company's financial operations, including all the kind of tax and reporting pieces. But I'm not an accountant and I'm not a lawyer. Two things that maybe I should have been. I don't know. But anyway, and basically about a year or two into that business, I had, it's kind of a bit of it sounds like a cliche. I don't know if you guys get those, but there was a meme here for a while in Canada about our tax authority, the CRA. So like you guys have the IRS, you have the CRA here. And, there's actually there was a problem because there were robocalls happening, like these phishing phone calls that you were getting, a lot of people saying like your taxes, whatever. And so, lo and behold, I got one of those calls. It was a Friday night and it was in December. Cause I remember like, it was so traumatic for me. I was sitting in my office and the phone rang and it said like CRA calling. And I almost didn't want to answer it because I was like, oh no, this is going to be one of those robocalls. And they're like, going to try to get me to give all my credit card information and do God knows what with it. But I did answer the call and it was worse. Worse than that, it was real. And it was an actual one of the government auditors who was calling to tell me this wonderful, lucky me that we were being audited. It just was like the worst possible timing. This was before Christmas and we were expecting a lot of money back. And, so all that to say that it was not a good time for me to have this interaction. And why I ramble about this is that, as a small business owner, you can't anticipate when you'll need help. And so this is basically what happened is that I've been audited before in some other organizations, but I always had a team. And in my last big company role, we also got audited a couple weeks, I think, before I left. And there were 2 auditors who physically came into the office for 2 weeks and sat there. But, because I had people, it wasn't stressful. I remember calling my CFO who was lovely and we had a director of compliance. There were all these other people who just took care of things. Right. And so, it didn't really it was a minor inconvenience. Whereas when this happened to me as one of the 3 members of a small business, I was panicked, it was Friday night and I have the government telling me we're audited and we don't know where to get the money and it's Christmas time. And it was terrifying. I was like, oh my God, how am I going to pay the bills? What's going to happen? It was really stressful. And that's where I felt really trapped. It was when you're a small business, where do you go for help? So that was really, to be honest, what inspired me more for Cansulta was that I was where does everybody else go? When you're a smaller mid-sized business and you need help, where do you go for help? And I don't know, Samí and Chris, what your experience is. Most people I talk to, I think we all do the same thing. These days, of course, right away, you just phone a friend if you have someone you know and you trust, right? Right away, I would be Samí, I need someone to do my video shoot. Who do you got? Right? So step 1, you phone the people you trust. Step 2 now is LinkedIn. So step 2 for everyone is you go to LinkedIn because you forget. We all have too many contacts. So you go there and you're oh, who do I maybe know? And you message them, right? But then what do you do if step 1 and 2, you might not know someone. Sometimes it's too specific. In this case, I needed a cross-border tax specialist. Well, I couldn't find that on my list, right? So it's what do you do in your niche? And then the scariest step is the one that I'm the most afraid of, which is just Googling it. And that's where we all get in trouble, right? You're oh my goodness. And in my case, when I did that, I remember, again, this was 3-4 years ago. And I remember Googling what I needed, this tax thing. And it was literally, there were 14 million hits. Wow. And I remember sitting here as in the same chair in my office. And I remember going through them and they was so scary because they all said different things. So this page would tell you fill in this form and that one says don't fill in that form. And I'm oh no, whatever it is, it's so scary, So for me, that was really where I know I'm going on, but that was really where I was there is purpose. People need help. They need help from people that know what they're doing, who they can just trust to be please take care of this. And sometimes that comes at a premium for cost, but not even always. Sometimes I found, and I want to hear from you guys too, I found actually in the long term, I actually end up saving money usually, when I work with people who know what they're doing. So a lot more expensive up front. It has that first burn, but actually compared to long term, I usually find that it was worth it financially. But also just the peace of mind of being oh, I know what's being done. It's being handled kind of correctly, So
Yeah.
oh my goodness. We'll take a breather. I told you, I talk about this all day long.
No, but I just want to say, you are, in my experience too, you are 100% true. I started, my entrepreneurial journey was as, I started a production company in Orlando, Florida, and as a small business. And now still running that, but my day job is a producer at an ad agency in Boston that handles like, $1 billion clients. And I'm very grateful to have had the experience of doing like the bootstrap, understanding from the small business, but now understanding from the big business perspective. And yeah, things are just done so much differently, and also sometimes so much more efficiently. And you think of like how that happened in a corporation, but you're like, wow, like I wish I knew that process, or I wish I knew if I knew how to even approach an agency, if I, as a small business, how to approach them. If I just knew like, hey, they're going to expect these forms and things to be laid out this way, I'd have a better shot at getting, more money and stuff. So it's just that contrast. But yeah, to your point, you don't know what you don't know. So yeah, so like, where do you go and how do you know how to ask the question? I think even before we started the recording, we were talking a little bit about AI and, producing podcasts and stuff, but AI is only as good as the prompt that you put into it. So when you get to that Google search, if you don't know the right question to ask, your answer is going to be, you're just going down rabbit holes that are unrelated to your problem.
Right. Yeah. And it's so true. I think that's why, right? When you see smaller agencies and communications and marketing agencies, of course, budgets are smaller and the clients are smaller. And sometimes you're strapped for getting the right talent because these budgets are smaller. But there's something to be said for pitching larger budgets, so then you can get the right talent. So that way, like you both mentioning, right? Bigger companies charge more because then they can get the right talent and people, right? That are able to, in a very turnkey and efficient way, get the job done with you not having to worry about it, right? And so then, and so that's what Cansulta is all about. It's really identifying and vetting all of this talent, amazing talent, I can only imagine, right? That's out there, but not just so they can come in and lean in, like they can literally take over the task and execute as if it were you. Like sometimes I say, oh my God, Dios mío, I wish I could just clone myself, right? Because I have to do it. Well, it's like I have a list, yay long, right? Like business cards that I need to follow up and do the business development, right? And I love doing that, but I'm bogged down sometimes just reviewing stuff before it goes out to clients, and nitpicking, like I'm often called, right? But it's because that's what I feel I have to do many times because it's not just right. And so then it makes me sometimes wonder, do I just need to get people that are more qualified for these particular roles? And so how do you go about vetting, right? Because there's an art to it. And I know that Cansulta has a very rigorous, application process, right? To make sure that you're just not getting a good talker, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
that there's substance there. Yeah. So
no, I love that you said that. And I also, I'd love to walk you through it. I'm just laughing too, because, okay, like this is just going to I think this will make you laugh. I'm literally sitting here. I did the same thing. I love meeting people. I go to all these events and these conferences, and then I come home and I literally like, I can't show you my whole desk because I'd be embarrassed, but I'm literally like surrounded by business cards of as we are the same.
We are the same.
All the people who I'm just like, I want to write back to them. But then, as you said, and I think that really is the burden of small businesses.
Yes.
And like, I don't get to these because, as you said, I have 100 small tasks that need to get done. But I really I love that you're saying that, because for me, like, that's the new model. I think that obviously everybody needs to find what works for them. And I certainly can't tell you I figured it out. I haven't. But the model that I'm working towards is, I think what you described too, is like, and I think for me, like, that's also what I was trying to go for with Cansulta is like, I think it's just about, finding great people and then also like empowering them and letting them do their jobs, and that's training for all of us as well. Like, I'm having a hard time too. I just added some members to my team as well. And I'm really trying, as you said, like, I'm really trying to step away from things that I have traditionally like micromanage because it's, when it's your own company, you're very close to the brand and to every detail. And it's really hard to let go. But I really do think that that's like the secret to, to all of it, of course, is like having great talent, whether they're employees or they're freelancers or contractors, like to building great people around you. And then also like letting them do the work. And I think that's the hardest part, right? Is like letting go. Like once you do find these awesome people, it's like, okay, well now I have to let them do their work and like respect that I hopefully did a good job in finding the right person. And now like, let's let them go off and actually do that work.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So what does that process look like? And I get it that there's a little bit of coaching, right? So they understand your mindset, the way you position your brand, right? The quality, like what level, right? Is not, I don't want to say good enough, but expected, right? What is the level of quality, right? That perfection doesn't exist. But where, like, meet me here, right? And then I'll take a quick glance at it and hopefully it'll be ready to go. And so what are those steps for identifying and vetting talent in all of these areas, right? You do finance, marketing, strategy, HR, technology.
Yeah. I know. I love it. Well, I'll tell you what we do now. And again, it may change because I believe in, continual improvement and all this stuff, but it does matter. So we do take feedback and change pretty often as well, the approach. But yeah, I'll tell you, walk you through what we're doing now. Because I do think that when possible, that people should do that themselves, right? Like before you do hire someone, right? Of course, like there's, should be whatever you want to call it, but some kind of vetting or some kind of chat before you give your money to somebody, right? In whatever capacity that is.
Yes.
And I think that we're all better trained to handle like hiring, right? I think most people are more familiar. Okay, if I'm going to hire someone, then they do tend to take a little more time with the interviews and, references and all of that. Even there, I know like it's really different depending on the company. But I think we're a little bit more attentive versus when we hire consultants or agencies, there's an expectation that like people will just be good. So you kind of are a little bit faster usually to engage, but it can be pretty dangerous because, you might end up with someone who's, as you said, Samí, like maybe someone who's good enough, but not great. And then you could be working with them for years. And like, that's kind of problematic, right? Like, what if all of a sudden, flash forward 3 years from now and you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with someone or a company and the work was okay, but just think of how much better it could have been, if you had like checked them out a little bit more, or maybe found someone a little bit better, right? So, so for us today, we have like two different streams actually, because we, just this last year, we started having like two different levels. And I don't love that, but we just started noticing like when I started Cansulta, we really wanted to differentiate ourselves by really only featuring very experienced people. So, and that wasn't to be like prejudice, but it was more like we didn't really want anybody learning on the job. The idea was like, if you come and you're part of the network, it's because you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And, you can start tomorrow on a project and it's really like, been there, done that. There's no learning curve. So when we started, it was really for pretty seasoned or senior experience, whatever you want to call it, consultants. But then over the years, what started happening is that we'd have great people who applied who just were more junior. So we got some people who were just out of school or maybe they only had a year or two. But, some of them were really great. We would see in meeting them or in their, like, even just in their resumes, like, wow, they had so much potential. So for that reason, last year, we opened what we call our associates, but basically like a junior stream. So we have now like two paths and the way we vet them is a little bit different. So, with our consultants, we have a 5-step process now. I think it's actually, I let you guys be the judge and weigh in on this. I think it's actually harder than most actual companies. Like in the last agency that I worked, the process like to come to join Cansulta is much more complicated than it was to like become a full-time employee there. Right. So, we start with the usual like resume screens. Of course, applications come in and we do the very basic checks of like, do you even meet the requirements for having experience in this field? I hope so. Then, we're very like tech friendly. I think, Chris, like you were saying. So, the next step in our process is actually an automated machine-led interview. So it takes most people 10 minutes. Some people love talking like me and they'll be like 30 minutes in these interviews. So we have a standardized set of questions that ask them about their experience and their tools and why they want to work with us, all of that. And that all gets recorded. And then it is like, those are also manually screened by our team, but it's, to handle it on volume. And also the idea behind that was for efficiency, but also to have like, to try to reduce some of the discrimination and have some consistency in terms of the interview, like steps and process, what we ask people so we can kind of try to gauge them in a more equal footing. Although we get a lot of feedback from people around the processes. And so I can't say it's perfect. People complain about the videos because it's true. Like it's harder from a, again, from a place of discrimination, like it probably would be best if we didn't have video and then you wouldn't see anyone. Because of course there's a natural bias in seeing people, but at the same time, it's really hard. Consulting is very much a role that involves interaction with your clients. So it's something that we struggle with of like, how do we, we don't want to discriminate, but also it's really hard to judge someone if you can't see how they would interact.
Right.
It's a bit of a challenge. So so we have an automated interview. And then the next step actually has changed over the years. So what we used to do is have a live interview next with our panel. And so we actually have combined that. It used to be like a live interview, and then you would be invited to a case study. So another opportunity to kind of showcase your skills and, show us that you're not all talk, right?
Yeah.
Now, when we get feedback over the years, same thing. People were just like, whoa, this is too much work. And so they're not wrong. I get it. You're like, oh, this isn't even a job. I'm just applying to be in the list, so that's a lot to be asking people. So now we've combined it. So it's super fun. In our step, like in our process, we invite people and they have a bank of these case studies they can choose from. So they pick and choose the one that's the most relevant for them. As you said, like, oh, it's an HR, scenario with like restructuring part of a company, or it could be there's a really fun one around TikTok and marketing. And like, if there's a new product launch and how you would deal with it. There's one on boats that everybody always does. There's one on like rice cakes and one on oats, and people for whatever reason always pick the same two scenarios. Right? So we have these like real world business case scenarios, and then the consultants come in and we role play. It's so much fun. We try to role play as if we were actually the client, and we pretend that it's not the first meeting, because the first meetings are all kind of everybody on their best behavior. So we role play that it's a second meeting, and we always try to have on our side at least 2 to 3 members. So we invite some of our other consultants to also be part of a panel, and then our team. So we really try to like round it out. And then that way for the applicant, like for the consultant, they're really like putting on a real show. So they're presenting their actual ideas, and we get to see, what did they say, right? Did they make a report? How do they talk about it? We get to kind of be mean, where did you get that data? How do you know that that's true? Like, is this just your opinion? So like for us, that's become one of the really pivotal moments. Is getting to see people kind of live in action, right? So to your point about it not being like all talk, because anybody can make a really great resume and anybody can say, whatever they want and have a great video. But it's usually in those case studies that we really see what people are capable of. Like, were they able to really play along with the scenario and envision being that, the rice cake owner or right. And kind of like picture themselves in that business, and how would they act? Would they, are they acting as if they were the client, where it was really their business and their money and their staff, and like, do they care, And so you can really kind of see from there that like, you can separate the people who are, just like maybe they are capable of doing the work, but they are not able of necessarily great about applying it to another business. So that's something to watch out for, right? And some people, like, they might be a great technical advisor. They might really know their stuff, like in HR or accounting. That's great, but they only know it in the context of the one or two kind of companies they've worked with before.
Yes.
So it's really good to see, like, are they versatile? Can they adapt? Do they understand other types of businesses?
Yeah.
Like, that's really important, as well as, just being able to explain what they've put together. Like, if you paid tens of thousands of dollars for someone's presentation, you don't want it to be a file you just put on your server and walk away from, right? It's like, oh, does this mean something for me? Could I do something with this information? What do you recommend? So that kind of, like, for us, the case study is really a pivotal piece.
Yeah.
And then after that, we have all the usual kind of stuff you would generally check. We do references, and we try to get testimonials from some previous clients, and, that we do, like, insurance and kind of our compliance check, just to make sure that everybody's kind of on the up and up.
Yeah.
So those are more of the administrative pieces, but it really is those first interactions. I find that that's what really differentiates, like, for us, what the vetting is, versus, like, even in companies, as I mentioned, like, when I worked in big organizations, I love process. So I always try to impose some kind of, like, test or case study whenever possible. But most companies don't have anything like that in place. Like, you just have an interview, X number of interviews, and that's it. And so you're really relying on someone's performance in that interview, and then maybe what they said from their references. But we all know references are really not the best way to judge anything for anyone. Right. So, so that's what we've kind of found the best process to be so far, is really kind of having this, like, interactive case study panel of your peers. And we've rejected a ton of people from that. And it sucks to do it, to be honest, right? Because sometimes you meet people who on paper are so amazing, and you're like, wow, this person is so smart and so impressive. But then actually you're like, oh, once you put them up to the task and, like, you're dealing with something for real, it's kind of disappointing, if it doesn't go somewhere from that.
Yeah.
And then
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was gonna say, so then how does the I guess that the next step, like, kind of like that matchmaking process with a client. So, and you even mentioned some people are, might be good in really good at something, but in the context of a limited experience or a limited sub-industry, subsector within an industry, how do you mash that up to make sure, the right consultant is with the right business coming in?
Honestly, Chris, I don't know. I would say it's definitely an art and not a science. And I wish it's funny because, especially now with big data and with AI, and I love those things too. So, like, me too, I'm constantly looking for, like, the magic silver bullet, right? Where I would be like, and I hope we get there. I hope that as the platform, like, grows and expands, I hope as we start to have thousands and tens of thousands of clients, then we'll use data more, like, intelligently to, kind of do that. But, at this point, it's pretty old school. It really is. It's kind of funny. Like, even with all the tools, we kind of end up coming back to good old fashioned matchmaking. And, I worked in a dating website for a year, only 1 year, but I learned a ton in that time.
Yeah.
And, like, a lot of the principles, it's kind of interesting because there we did have tons of data and everything was kind of data driven. And so I thought with Cansulta, that's how I envisioned things too when we started. I thought, we'll just have people, and that is how the website does work. People put in their skills and their credentials and all this good stuff. And the system does do the matching. But that's what we find in real life, especially, with smaller businesses, and, like, that the match with someone is so critical, right?
Right.
So mostly what we end up doing is we end up using the website and we use the databases more for, like, our shortlists. And it's a good way to get the process started. So then it's like, oh, Chris, now I know you and I know your style and what's important to you. Here are 2 or 3 people who we think have the right, like, vibe and match for you.
Yes, I love that.
It's still all about that, like, match
sense,
And vibe and energy. Yes. And that's true. Like, finding the right people is a lot like dating. We talk about that all the time too. But just knowing that you do this every day, all day, and that you've already gone through that initial painful, right, exercise of figuring out, does this person have all of the qualities, right, that most business owners are looking for in a consultant, right? That it kind of like, brings together all the critical pieces, right? Which is, knowing how to own a project, knowing how to be quick on your toes, knowing how to be decisive, knowing how to make recommendations with a solid rationale behind it, right?
Yep.
Knowing how to listen to people, knowing how to respond in a way that's respectful but still assertive, right? Without being a dick. Like all of these, it's like all of these things that really come to play.
Right.
You've done all of that, right? And I think it's brilliant because it eliminates all of this like shooting blanks, right? It's like, you're like, I'm trying to find somebody. Help me, right? And so then here, at least it's a pool of people in multidisciplinary approach, right? That they're there. And then, that you could just look at their profile and start dating. I think it's awesome from a business standpoint, right? I think that's really brilliant. I really applaud you for that. And I love that you're always looking to figure out what's the next step, what's the best way to make it better and better. But I agree with you. The vibe is something that you can a machine can't assess vibe, right?
Right.
Vetting the vibe is something that I'm glad that you go through that process. And it's kind of like in the middle and the yummy of the process, because I feel that that's what makes it or breaks it in terms of a long-term, right, engagement with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Samí, like when we were talking in the beginning, about kind of like why, everybody has their why and all that. And I guess, like, don't get me wrong, this is my business and I hope that it becomes a huge financial success. It's currently not, but hopefully we're on the way. But really, like, I really actually just like want people to work differently. It's just to spare them, because I don't know what you're, for either of you, but, for me, like, I just really had too many bad experiences. And really, like, I don't want to be a downer, but like when I started Cansulta, yes, there were those reasons why on both sides that I talked about, like needing the service. But it was also like, for me, it was very obvious, like whether it's a website or however it gets done. It's more that like, I just over the years have spent so much money. I've hired people but I just like, it didn't work out. And at a certain point, it's not their fault individually, right? Like one at a time, there's always some reason. But whether it was with like hiring people on my own team, and again, it's one, there are a million reasons why that doesn't work out. It's not them, it's always us, right? So maybe you didn't give them enough coaching or enough time, or we didn't have enough process, like all valid reasons. But then even with the freelancers and the consultants who I've hired, like I have spent tens of thousands of dollars, probably a lot more than that, but I don't like to do the math. I don't like to remember. I've spent a lot of money that I've paid people, and basically whatever it was, flash forward 3 months, 6 months, whatever later, and was disappointed with the experience of working with them. And I guess like, I really just don't want that to happen to anyone ever again. Like, I don't want it to happen to me. So it's like, in a way, it was like my own little database of like, okay, who are these good people that now I don't mind, spending my own money on. But also it's like, I just don't want other people to go through that anymore, because it's really painful, right? Especially again, like in a smaller mid-sized company, like this is your blood, sweat and tears. It's your money. It's your everything. It can be your kids' education and tuition, right? It could be your parents' retirement plans, right? Like it really matters, and I guess that's the thing is like in big corporations, it matters a little bit less, to be honest, right? Like not to say that they can afford to make mistakes, but it's not as real. It doesn't like okay, you have years where the company makes a ton, the company doesn't do so well. Okay, so what happens? Maybe you don't have a corporate retreat, or like this year, my bonus was a lot less than it was before, but that's really different in a small and mid-sized context, right? Like this is like, it really means something, right? Like how your company performs is really like how you and your family and your life and your world, exist. So I guess like for that, I just get very protective about it. I want small businesses and startups, like I want them to be successful. I don't want them to waste money. I don't want them to work with people who can't actually help them. It's like, because it really matters. So
yes, it really does.
So with that said, I mean, obviously there's, I think small and medium businesses would very much appreciate the length that you go to vet your consultants that are, on the roster. But what would you say? And obviously this, varies. Every business is different and faces unique challenges, yet very similar ones. When is the right time for a small to medium business owner, like to say like, hey, now I need a consultant and this is the right scenario, the right situation. Like when should somebody call you?
Oh, wow. Chris, that's such a good question. Wow, that's so smart. I already hate myself for this answer, but of course, like, cause I'm like, oh, of course, what would I say? The answer is always yesterday. It's like with anything. When is the best time? Like the best time to work with anyone is when it's proactive and it's preventative, right?
Right.
And what do we all do? I am absolutely the same. Like I wait until I'm, like what's being terrible? It's up shit creek without a paddle, right? Like, it's like, oh, like now I'm in trouble. Exactly. It's always too late. It's always like once things have gone wrong and then we're like, rescue mode.
Right.
And that's still a good time. I think like, hey, if that's, when you have your aha moment, if it's when you're, as you said, shit show mode, Samí, like that's cool, I'll take it. But I mean, ideally what we should all be doing is getting ahead, right? And so I think like that's the other thing that we miss out on in the small and mid-size community is that like, you don't have the luxury of planning. And that's, to go back to Samí, what you started with in the beginning, like again, in big corporations, strategic planning, annual reviews, like these are all things that are done years in advance, right? Like when you're in a leadership of an organization, you're working on your 5-year plan, your 3-year plan. Even like the next year is kind of close, right? Like if in the fall you haven't already figured out all of your priorities for the next fiscal year, you're probably in trouble. And so, and then you compare that to a small mid-sized business. Like I don't know you guys, like most days I am pleased if I know what's happening next week, like, to have some semblance of a plan or generally speaking, what's going on. Yeah. And I'm just satisfied if I'm even in the right calendar month, like if I'm working in the right place. So it's just the reality. Like we don't have the same luxury of strategy and planning. But that's too bad because like, that's where people get ahead, right? It's like when we take it's like anything, I'm sure it's like the doctor. I'm sure it's like the gym if I ever went, that you reap more benefit, you reap what you sow, right? So if you like try to make the time if we put a little more time into a strategy and plan, like I would say to people, think about like consulting shouldn't be, or just getting help, right? It doesn't have to be it shouldn't be a bad thing. It's not like you're getting sent to the principal's office. Like, you need to go see a consultant now because you screwed up. No, like you might be, hopefully, your business is already doing well. It's really a question of like, could you be doing better? Right? Like you might be running a business and things are actually good. You're making money. Your team is happy. Things are on track. That's great. Like, congratulations. And so then let's just think what if you actually brought in 1 or 2 people to help you out in the areas where maybe you're not as strong? Like, just think of how much more and how much better you'd be doing. Like, it could be even better than it is now. So, I think to like kind of shift our mindsets from it being like, I need to get help because I suck or my business isn't good. And changing that to being like, no, I'm doing just fine. But wow, could I be doing even better if I got some help from people who have done this 1,000 times over? So like, let's start to think of it as something we can do to like treat ourselves and reward yourself rather than it being like a bad thing. It's not punishment. It's actually kind of a reward.
Yeah, I love that. This is really, really great. I love that you shared so generously like your process because it makes sense, right? And the thing is, as we get, it's always it always uh, comes with fear. So when you're trying to add people, even as consultants, right? Because it's an additional expense, right?
Yeah.
But it's so worth it if you're finding the right people. And so
Right.
just knowing that you've kind of like grabbed the bull by the horns and created a platform that eliminates that daunting process of just finding quality people, right? The vibe is a whole other thing. That's up to us, right? Identifying the
Exactly.
right person, right? But just knowing that you figured out that formula to be able to identify people that can just step right in and provide ease,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Ease of production and performance within a company as they look to scale. I think that's just really great. And I know, I really appreciate you coming and joining us today and teaching us, right, a little bit about, how to do this because it's not easy. It really is not easy.
I really appreciate it. Thank you both. I just like love any opportunity to talk about, as you said, like how we can help businesses and help each other to kind of grow and make it. I become the older I get, I just becoming a bigger and bigger hippie. I just I really just think there's enough for everyone. There's enough work. There's enough money. There's enough business. There's just no reason why we can't all help each other and everybody can do well. So I
Yes.
really appreciate
love
the
that approach.
opportunity. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. Thank you so much for joining us today. This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. Thank you for tuning in and tell your friends to find us on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to show up and speak up.